Welcome back with us, Chairman and CEO of ReNew Power, Sumant Sinha. Sumant, always a pleasure to talk to you. Let me start by getting a sense of some of those major energy sector reforms that were announced by the government over the weekend. Your thoughts on the kind of positive spin-off it will have on the economy?
I think, Shweta, these are very positive moves. I think if there's any one issue that people can point at in this government's last 4 or 5 months, it is that there have been few very large and big ticket reforms. And I think what the government has done over the last few days in terms of the diesel price deregulation, the announcement of the gas pricing, making labor reforms, labor management a little bit easier, I think those now are starting to move in the direction of the big ticket reforms that people have been looking for. And so I think this is very heartening. And I think now, particularly with the government's stronger political mandate, the expectation level certainly would have gone up that the government will deliver on more of some of these big ticket reforms.
All right, let me talk specifically about the fact that will this government have the political muscle to carry through a decision like diesel deregulation? Because on one hand, many believe it's also been lucky that the falling crude prices have given it room to take those tough decisions. But what happens when crude starts inching northwards? Will the government be able to stick to it?
Yeah, well, that is something that remains to be seen, but you're absolutely right that the recent and somewhat unexpected softening in oil prices did give this government, the liberty and the flexibility of coming out of the deregulation and reducing prices at the same time, which actually made it a lot easier for them to do this, this reform measure. Now, going forward, one just hopes that the government is able to stick to its current point of view and does not then back away from this once oil prices start going up. I think the only good news is that any future forecast of oil prices over the next 1 to 2 years seem to indicate that prices are going to remain somewhat softer. And so maybe there may not be a specific situation too high on the negative side in terms of prices going up. So maybe the government's resolve may not get tested.
All right, and that's something that the government is also clearly betting on. Let me talk specifically about the gas price hike that was also announced by the government, given that it impacts your sector, power, more directly out there. Your thoughts on the fact that some experts believe 5.7 clearly isn't good enough to either attract investments or to ensure that the sector gets that much needed boost. Many others actually hailing it as at least a decision taken movement forward.
Yeah, I know. I think that the government is really focused on making sure that prices don't go up too high because, all of that then feeds into the broader economy and then that feeds into interest rates as well. And then that then depresses investments across the board. So I think at some level, the government is trying its best while opening things up to also not let prices go up too high. Now, in the case of gas, unlike in the case of diesel, there is no real global benchmark. Gas pricing is fairly local. And so it was really in the hands of the government to decide what the price level should be. And I think they've decided to go with a slightly shorter term solution, which is to keep current prices a little bit on the lower side. And don't forget, the government has the flexibility of revising prices every 6 months. So if they feel that this is not working from an investment standpoint in the sector, they always have the flexibility of moving prices up by another 50 cents or another $1 at some near point in the future. So I think, why start at the higher price level to begin with? Why not start at something that is slightly lower and then see how things evolve? And if they have to increase prices, they can always do that later as well.
I have to talk to you now about the coal sector reform, something that's on the cards as well, and clearly something which is absolutely, again, an important input as far as the power sector goes. There's been complete mess as far as the sector goes. The Supreme Court cancelling some of those blocks has had a negative impact. What, according to you, can be the best way forward to address the issues in the coal sector, something the government is looking at very urgently as well?
Yeah, I think there are 2 or 3 different ways to look at the power sector right now, Shweta. One is the issue of the immediate problems that we have, which are really the issues around the coal allocations, the fact that we have a lot of gas capacity that is not yet running. And so the government has to find some way of sorting out these problems. Because don't forget, behind all of this, there are lots of bank loans involved as well, and therefore bank credit quality issues are also sort of involved. And then, of course, how all of this feeds into end pricing for consumers. So there are fairly broad ramifications on how the government deals with these issues. And because these are urgent issues, I think the government as step one will have to find a solution for how to reallocate coal blocks, given the fact that there are pithead production plants already set up. In some cases, let's say aluminum smelters have been set up. And that's going to be a bit of a tricky one, because you want to give it to the same guys who had it earlier, but at the same time you want to do it through a transparent process. And therefore the government obviously favors the bidding route to do that. And so how all of that is going to pan out, I think the contours of that are still being worked out. But that's going to be a fairly important aspect. The second thing they've talked about is that wherever there are shortages, they will import and they will pool. And, try to give some sort of a pool price to all the plants that are stuck right now. And at least allow them to do debt servicing, if not give returns to equity investors. Now, again, how all of that plays out remains to be seen, because we haven't yet seen the contours of final solutions on some of these issues being worked out. I think once these issues are solved, and they are very big issues, Shweta, and let's not underestimate the complexity around some of these things, I think only then can the government start thinking about the next level of solutions, which are, okay, now that we've done this, now how do we think about creating capacity, new capacity for the future? How do we think about renewables in this whole mix? How do we build the grid out? And how do we make sure that power pricing to end consumers becomes, more market linked as well? So those are more structural factors that the government also has to look at doing, but I think it'll only do it once these issues are solved.
Okay, and you mentioned price of power, and there I'd like your view on whether it's time to actually start telling end consumers the days of cheap power are over. You clearly have to pay much more for your power.
I think so, Shweta, and I think that has been the case for quite some time. The problem has been that the political will to increase prices has been lacking, and that is why we have several discoms in fairly poor financial health. And ultimately that is what feeds into the entire system, because if the off-taker health is poor, banks become reluctant to lend, and that will always curtail investments in the sector. And that then leads to load shedding and so many other issues that we're aware of. So I think we have to have a situation where prices to end consumers now begin to go up, and that's not going to be politically palatable, but I think there's no real solution to this issue.
Clearly a long road ahead as far as the coal and power sector goes. What should be the government's top priorities then, Sumant? Would you like to really highlight what is it that the government should do almost immediately to address some of these concerns for the minister, particularly Piyush Goyal, who clearly has his hands full?
I think the things that he's doing right now are on the right track, which is that he's trying to solve or come up with a solution for the coal problem. He's trying to get the stranded gas plants up and running. I think those are the two sort of big critical issues out there that he has to try to resolve at the first opportunity. And I think then behind that are issues around the broader structural reforms, which is how do you increase prices and take it out of the hands of politicians? How do you truly make the state regulators truly independent? And how do you have a better grid management system which is able to, have a much more complex sort of a management situation where there are producers who are producing intermittent power. How do you do the baseload management? So lots of issues around the grid that also have to be dealt with. And then, of course, the whole block of renewable energy and how do you make our entire power system a lot more modern and forward-looking.
Okay, last question there for you. The impact that the BJP win in critical states, Haryana and Maharashtra, is likely to have overall on the economy.
Well, these two elections are fairly large in terms of determining whether, in fact, the Modi magic still worked. And the good news is that 5 or 6 months after the general election, clearly there is a strong momentum still behind Narendra Modi, and his political mandate remains as strong as ever. And I think he has to now take much stronger and bolder measures, which they've obviously talked about, and which the industry is now waiting, and by the industry, I would think everybody is now waiting with bated breath to see hopefully a slew of now positive announcements. But I think the most important issue for the government is that while the domestic economy can, do with a lot of measures which the government looks like they're going to do, I think all of this is going to happen in the backdrop of a fairly soft global macroeconomic environment. The US is doing well, but behind that the Fed might increase rates, so there's that big uncertainty that is looming there. The Eurozone is very soft. Chinese growth is tapering off. So while commodity prices are going down, demand is also going down. And so how all of this plays out is something that remains to be seen. I hope that there is no global risk aversion which then sort of limits fund flows into India. And fund flows is something that India requires very strongly to really give this growth momentum a strong push. So let's see how all of that plays out.
Right, Sumant Sinha, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. And with that, it's a wrap here from me as well. Of course, the reform drive that Sumant was talking about, we may expect some big news later in the day with regard to coal sector reforms and the impact that will be felt as far as tomorrow's session is concerned. We'll be, of course, tracking all that and much more. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.